Okay. All right, let's do it. All right, good evening, everyone. Parshas Chayei. Let us start again. What I want to, the bulk of the Parsha this week addresses the episode of Abraham sending out Eliezer, his servant, in order to find a wife for Abraham's son Yitzchak. The Torah tells the story twice. It tells it to us as it happens, and then the Torah repeats the entire story as Eliezer tells the story to Rivka's family. And that is really the essence of the story. What I'd like to discuss is the concept of avdus, the concept of being an eved. Eliezer is, of course, the trusted servant of Abraham. And there is a well-known Rashi. It's quoted often. And I'd like to start tonight with that Rashi, and then we'll use it as a springboard for our larger discussion. The Torah describes the pasuk on the top of your sheet that Eliezer asks the question to Avram when he's first taking the oath in the beginning of the Parsha. He says, Va'omar el Adoni. This pasuk is actually from when Eliezer is telling the story over to Rivka's family. He says, and I said to my master, which he does in the beginning of the Parsha as well, Ulai lo selecha isha acharai. Maybe the woman who I find won't come home with me. Here I am, I'm traveling outside of the land of Canaan. I'm going to the place of Abraham's birthplace, and maybe I'll find the right woman, but maybe she's not going to want to come back, Eliezer says to Avram. What should I do then? Rashi comments on the word ulai, that maybe she won't come back. Rashi notes that the word ulai is misspelled. It's missing a vav. It's not spelled aleph, vav, lamed, yud, but just ulai without the vav, which could be read as, Rashi points out, elai ksiv, as if it says to me, meaning to say, Rashi says, bas haisalo leEliezer. Eliezer had a daughter himself. He was looking to find some type of excuse, some type of scenario. That he can create some type of excuse, environment, a circumstance where Avram would say, you know what, Eliezer, I'm looking for a shidduch for my son. You have a daughter. Why don't we marry the two of them together? And that's hinted at that this was Eliezer's big dream when he says the word ulai, maybe she won't come back. And it's spelled as if he says elai, to me, that if we can't find an appropriate shidduch where I'm going, maybe at least to me there's an appropriate shidduch. I have someone. Avraham says back to Eliezer, Beni Baruch, my son is blessed. V'ata arur, and you as a servant are cursed. Ve'ein arur midabek bebaruch, and that which is blessed cannot cling, cleave, attach itself to that which is cursed. So there's no way this shidduch is going to work. That is the Rashi. We're going to see later, Mirz Hashem, the actual medrash that Rashi is basing himself off of. And that is the conversation which takes place in which Eliezer hopes, dreams, tries to convince Avram to marry him, his own daughter, to his son Yitzchak. And Avram says, there's no way, it's not happening. Now, this idea that Eliezer has a dream of marrying off his daughter was not some wishful thinking, impossible, out of left field dream. Eliezer actually would have had every reason in the world to think that this would have been or was going to be an appropriate shidduch. And let's take a look at some of the chazal, some of the midrashim that describe Eliezer, and I think it comes out clear exactly why Eliezer thought this would have been an appropriate idea. The pasuk describes Eliezer in a couple of different places in a couple of different ways. One of them is in the beginning of our parsha here. Vayomer Avram el Avdo in source number 2. Vayomer Avram el Avdo Zakan Beiso. Avram said to his servant, who was the master of his house, Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, who ruled over everything that Avraham had. Simno yadcha tachas yirechi. Place your hand underneath my thigh. Take this oath. So how is Eliezer described as he takes this oath to go find a wife for Yitzchak? He's described as the Zakan Beiso, the elder of the house, Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, who rules over everything. The Medrash says, it's really the Gemara here in source number 3, the Gemara Maseches Yuma says, from all the days of the Avos, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were always sitting and learning in Yeshiva. Now again, the Torah hasn't been given yet. There's no such thing as Gemara yet. But we find throughout Chazal the idea that Torah, we know, was created well before all of creation. They were learning Torah. And the Chazal described it as if they were sitting in yeshiva. So Avram Avinu Zaken Yoshev B'Yeshiva. Avram, of course, he was a Zaken. He sat in yeshiva, as the pasuk says, "Avram Zaken Ba Bayamim." Avraham was already elder. This is how the Parsha begins. The quest to send off his servant to find a wife. He was old. He was Ba Bayamim, which the Gemara understands. He was Yoshev B'Yeshiva. He sat and learned all day. Eliezer, Evan Avram, Zaken Yoshev B'Yeshiva. Eliezer did the same thing as his master Avram, as the pasuk says, "V'yom Avram el Avdo, Zakan Beso." In the same way that the Torah describes Avram as a Zaken, Zaken, the Gemara darshans elsewhere, comes from the root of the word Zayin Zeh. Kan Zeshekana Chachma. The reason why we call a Zaken is because the word Zaken stands for Zeshekana Chachma. Someone who's already acquired wisdom, which is of course why we have the mitzvah to honor and to treat with reverence the elders, because they have wisdom of the life that they've already lived. But the same word Zaken is used to describe Avraham as a Kana Chachma, one who acquired wisdom by sitting and learning his whole life. Eliezer did the same thing. The Gemara Maseches Yuma continues, Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, who ruled over everything that Avraham had. Amar Rabbi Eliezer shemoishel b'toras Rabbo. What does it mean he ruled over everything that Avraham had? The pasuk is not describing his finances. The Torah is describing Eliezer ruled over all of the Torah that Avraham had. Eliezer was a master in all of it. Who domestic Eliezer, when the pasuk earlier a couple of weeks ago described when Avram says, "All I have, what bracha can you give me, Hashem? All I have is domestic Eliezer." Domestic, like Eliezer from Damascus. What is the Torah describing him as domestic? So the Gemara darshans, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer again, shedoyle umashke. The word domestic is a combination of the word who dips down like to draw water and gives to drink. Mitayraso shorabo la'acherim. He's like the person who has the bucket, who dips into the well and gives others to drink. That's what he does with the Torah of Avram Avinu. So Eliezer, the servant of Avram, is described in three ways. As a Yoshev B'Yeshiva his whole life, like Avram, his master. As a master of he was a master of his master Avram's Torah. And not just that he mastered the Torah, but he would dip into the well of Avram's Torah and give others to drink. The Medrash in source number 4 then takes it one step further and says, what's the meaning when Avram says to Eliezer, who is Zikan Beso, Shayaziv Ikunun Shelo Doimelo. The radiance of his face of Eliezer was the same or similar to Avram's. He had the same spiritual, when you saw Avram Avinu, there was a spiritual radiance that emanated from Avram's face. Then you looked at his servant Eliezer, and Eliezer had the same spiritual radiant face. Hamoshel b'chol asher lo, says the Medrash, shayasholit biyitzro kimoso. Eliezer ruled over his own Yetzer Hara in the same way Avraham did. 5 comparisons the Gemara, the Medrash makes between Eliezer and Avram. Eliezer had become a twin of Avram. Pshuto kimashmo. He was his twin. He was his spiritual twin in the radiance that emanated off of his face, in the Torah that he learned, the way he sat in yeshiva, the way that he taught, the way that he controlled himself, that he was a gibur as in control of his Yetzer Hara. Eliezer had become the Talmud of Avram, to the degree, if you looked at one and you looked at the other, it's spiritually speaking, they're the same. So when you now go back to the Rashi, who said that Eliezer harbored this secret dream to marry his daughter off to Avram's son, this is not a dream that's unfounded. It would make sense that such a student who Chazal described in such a way would think it would be an appropriate shidduch that he should marry his daughter off. Now, not just does Avraham then shoot that down, but let's take a look at how far off he really is as we get this vision of poor Eliezer dreaming this dream and being totally turned away at every opportunity. Look at the source number 5. These are the actual psukim in the beginning of our Parsha. This is the shvuah, the oath that Avram makes his servant Eliezer take. There are 2 parts to the oath. The first is you may not take a woman from the Bnos HaKna'ani, which Anjer Aniche Yoshev Bikirbo. I dwell in their midst now. You may not take a woman from here. And then the second part of the shvuah is the beginning of Pasuk Dal, the second line, Ki im el artzi ve'el moladati telech. You have to go back to my homeland, the place of my birth. That's where you'll go and take a wife for my son, for Yitzchak. Then what happens is, in Pasuk K, the Eved Eliezer asks, Ulai lo soiveo yishol alechas achar. What if she doesn't want to come back? Should I take my son, your son, there? Meaning Eliezer says, I believe I'll be successful. I'm going to find a woman for your son Yitzchak. But what if she doesn't want to come back to Eretz Canaan with me? Should I then bring Yitzchak back to your birthplace? Avram says, absolutely not. My son is not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. He's not allowed to go there. I am sure you will be successful, he says. However, in Pasuk Ches, skipping down to the last Pasuk, he says, if it indeed happens that you find such a woman and she refuses to come home with you, you're literally clean from your oath. You're absolved. You're absolved. Rakes b'ni lo teshiv shama. You can't bring my son there. So listen, you got stuck. If you find the girl and she won't come, you can't bring Yitzchak there. If she won't come home, you're clean. Everything is off. Okay, so everything is off. Well, what should we do with Yitzchak? We got to get him married, right? So all that Avram says is, if you find her and she won't come home, you're free from the oath. But what should we do next? Says Rashi, source number 6. Rashi then adds, well, what should we do then? Take a daughter of Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. Who are Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre? So they are, as the Torah described in last week's Parsha as well, the Baalei Bris Avram. They were Avram's Chevra. Avram had developed a Chevra, these 3 characters, Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. We're going to leave aside. Torah mentions them a couple of times. We have a couple of references with them, but we don't have enough time to go into that tonight. So Avram basically says, listen, I want you to go to my place of my birth. That's where I want you to find a woman, a wife for Yitzchak. And if she won't come home, okay, then go to my friends. Let's go to Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre. What do we know about them? Very little. What spiritual state were they in? They were Chevra with Avraham. Do we ever hear anything about them, about their children? Nothing. But Avram says to Eliezer, listen, if you can't go to my, okay, at least go to my friends. Get a shidduch from there. And we see in the background, Eliezer is saying, I have a daughter. No, Eliezer, go to Aner, Eshkol, Mamre. Then Maral explains, for those who are interested in source number 8, where when Avram said, Bikir, but I dwell in their midst here, I'll release you from my oath, but not go to, I told you that you can't take a girl from Canaan, but I'll release you only from that oath, not to go to the general Canaan, but you can go to my friends. Furthermore, source number 9, fast forward to the story, Eliezer meets Rivka, of course, at the well. Rivka takes her home to meet the family, and they're sitting over dinner. Eliezer says, I don't want to eat until I tell you my whole story, and you give me an answer. And so he tells the whole story. At the end of the story, he concludes here, Pasuk Mem Tes here in source number 9. If you're going to do kindness with my master, with Avram, please tell me. Tell me what you're going to do. And if you're not going to do kindness, you're not going to send your daughter home, Higiduli, tell me, ve'efne al yamin o al smo, so that I can turn to the right or to the left. It's a very strange phrase that he says, if you're not going to send your daughter, let me know so that I can turn to the left or to the right. What do you mean turn to the left or to the right? What should he say? He says, so I should go back home. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. I went through this with Avram. He told me that if she won't come back with me, I'm free. Why does he say I'll turn to the right or turn to the left? Rashi here comments as well. Al Yamin, if you're not going to let me take Rivka home with me, I need to turn to my right to the Benos Yishmael, because that's still a fulfillment of back to Avraham's homeland and the place of his birth. I'll take a son from Yishmael. Yishmael was Avram's son. He has some descendants. I'll take a daughter from there. Oh, I'll turn to the left. Mi Benos Lot. Lot also is family from Avram, Chayei Yoshev l'smolo, he's to the left. So in essence, Eliezer is saying to the family of Rivka, listen, if this isn't going to work out, let me know. I got other places to go. I got to go to Yishmael. I got to go to Lot. wait a minute. Eliezer is thinking, I have the daughter. I am on the same level as Avram Avinu in every way. I am a master of his Torah. I teach his Torah. I have the same spiritual radiance as he does. I have a daughter. And Avram is in essence saying, listen, Eliezer, I need you to go to my homeland. And if you can't find from my immediate family, then go to Yishmael or Lot, two characters who are not known for their righteousness throughout all of Chumash. But maybe you can find me a daughter from them. And if you can't find from my family, and you can't find from Lot, and you can't find Yishmael, then come home, and maybe you'll find from Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre, these friends that I picked up here in the land. But you, Eliezer, it's not happening. Why not? Eliezer has every trait that would seem to fit something if you're looking for a father-in-law, a mechutin, to marry off his daughter. Says the Maral, trying to explain why not. The Maral uses language in source number 12. Why is he willing to take Aner Eshkol? They're from Canaan. The Maral asks the question straight. Eliezer is clearly a bigger tzaddik than every other option. Nira ki bibnos Aner Eshkol umamre. They might not be such holy people themselves, Aner Eshkol and Mamre, nor is Lot, nor is Yishmael. Ein kol kach klala. However, they don't have any klala. There's no curse affiliated with them. The ne'emar ve'avarcha mivarcheka. Avram is given a blessing. Aval Eliezer, limroshigam hu hayam misharis is Avram. Even though Eliezer himself was the misharis, he served in Avram's house, and he was a moshel bakol. He ruled over everything spiritually, Torah. He had it all. But he has a certain deficiency. He's an eved. It's a curse to be an eved. And it was still in him. And therefore, he wasn't willing. Avram wasn't willing to go there. It didn't matter whatever spiritual state Eliezer had achieved. There's no way that his son can marry Eliezer's daughter. Now, I'd like to share with you the actual medrash that Rashi had quoted. Rashi in the very beginning quoted it, and Rashi simply said that Eliezer had a dream to marry his daughter off to Yitzchak, and Avram shot it down and said, you can't. I'm blessed, you're cursed, it's not going to be a good shidduch. The actual medrash that Rashi is borrowing this from adds significant detail to the way we view this dream of Eliezer. The Medrash says as follows: "Vayomrei lo ha'eved hadu dichsev." This pasuk, the Medrash is dashing, which we've been speaking about, that the Eved said maybe she won't come back, is a reference to the pasuk in Hosea, pasuk in Navi. Kna'an biyado mazne mirma. You are a traitor, using the word Canaan, not in its simple meaning of the land of Canaan, but a person who is a traitor. But you use Mozne Mirma. Moznayim are scales. Mirma means of deceit. The Navi is saying you're a traitor, but you're trading it deceitfully. Your scales are not honest. La ashok ahev. You love to cheat. Now, the pasuk in Hosea is simply talking about, as the Navi describes, Klal Yisrael sometimes acting like a traitor who uses deceitful scales and loves to cheat. The Navi is berating the Jewish people. The Medrash says that pasuk describing a traitor who likes to cheat, who likes to be deceitful, is actually a reference to Eliezer. The Medrash darshans Canaan. Now, the Medrash darshans the word Canaan in its literal meaning. Ze Eliezer, who was a descendant of Canaan, Canaan, who was a descendant of Cham, Cham, who was a son of Noach, who was cursed by Noach. When Cham saw Noach in his naked, drunken stupor, so the pasuk, we'll see this pasuk in a few minutes, and Noach curses his son Cham and says, Eved avadim, you'll be a servant of servants. Canaan is a son of Cham, and Eliezer's descendant from that lineage. So the Medrash darshans, this pasuk that uses the word Canaan, which means a trader, somebody who trades goods, is a reference to Eliezer. Biyado mozni mirma. In your hands, Eliezer, are deceitful scales. What does it mean that there are deceitful scales in the hand of Eliezer? He was weighing his daughter. What does it mean he was weighing his daughter? Is she fit to marry Yitzchak? Is she not fit to marry Yitzchak? So that he, like, so to speak, had her on the scales of justice to see, no, can this work? Is she going to be good enough to marry? But the Medrash says those are deceitful scales. You're using a scale and the scale is not calibrated. You're trying to figure out if she fits. You're off, Eliezer. La ashok ahev. The literal meaning of the pasuk again, you love to cheat. La ashok ahuvo shel olam. If you would have succeeded, Eliezer, you would have cheated the beloved one of the world, who's referring to Yitzchak. So that the Medrash sees in Eliezer's dream of marrying his daughter, even though he had all of the spiritual characteristics that should have made that a viable idea, somehow in that was something missing. His scale of measurement was off, and had he pulled this off, he would have cheated the beloved one of Yitzchak. And Avram therefore answers him and says, this is never going to work. I'm blessed. You are cursed. That leaves us, says the Rosh Yeshiva. Again, I didn't mention it this week. I mentioned it last week many times. All of this is based on the Torah of Rav Chaim Yaakov Goldvicht, Rosh Yeshiva from Kerem, even though I don't mention it this is all his Torah. We have to understand then, what's the problem of being an Eved? What are we missing that has created this dynamic? So look at source 13. This is a pasuk that goes back to the Akedah we read about in last week's Parsha, 2 weeks ago, last week's Parsha. Torah describes, Bayom HaShlishiyah, Avram is given the command to take his son to Har HaMoriah and offer him as a korban. And Bayom HaShlishiyah, on the third day, Vayisa Avram Eseino, Vayar Samakol Meirachok. He lifts up his eyes, does Avram, and he sees the place from afar. Vayomer Avram el Na'arav. So Avram says to his two Na'arim who had come with him, who Chazal say elsewhere is Yishmael and Eliezer, Shvu lachem po im hachamor. You stay here with the donkey. Vani v'hanar, and I and my young lad Yitzchak nilcha ad ko. We're going to go over there. V'nishtachaveh v'nashuva alechem. We'll go bow down. We'll go do our business. We'll pray and bow down, and then we'll return to you. That's how we leave. So Avram, even though he leaves his house with two servants, as Chazal identify again, his son Yishmael and Eliezer, when he gets to the place and he sees it from a distance, he says to them, you stay here with the donkey. Me and Yitzchak, we're going to go on ahead and we'll come back. The Medrash is very bothered by the additional detail that he says, stay here with the donkey. Just say, stay here. We're going back. We're going forward. Why are we even told at all? The whole detail of this lifting up his eyes and seeing the place. The Medrash is troubled and fills in the story as follows in source 14. This is the Medrash. Ma'ra'ah. What does it mean? He lifted up his eyes and he saw the place from afar. Ra'ah anan kashur bahar. He saw the cloud of glory, Hashem's presence atop of the mountain. Avram said to himself, that must be the place. That cloud, that's signifying the place is up ahead. Amar li Yitzchak. So Avram says to his son Yitzchak, Bini, my son, Roya eshmashani roya. Do you see what I see? Do you see that spiritual cloud, the presence of Hashem? Do you see that? Amalei, him, yeah, I see that, Abba. Amar l'shnei na'arav. So Avram then turns to his two servants who had accompanied him. Royim atem ashani roa. He says, do you see anything up ahead? Amrulo, they take a look, they say, Lav, we don't see anything. Amar, Avram says, Hoil v'chamor eino roa. Since the donkey can't see that cloud of glory, the donkey can't see the presence of Hashem, v'atem ein atem royim, and you can't see, so you stay with the donkey. Shvu lachem po im hachamor. So me and Yitzchak see it, we're going on ahead. You can't see it, the donkey can't see it, you stay with the donkey. From where do we see that avodim are similar to an animal? Mehacha, from right here. Avram says, Shvu lachem po im hachamor, stay here with the donkey. not im hachamor can be read, not as im hachamor with the donkey, but am hachamor, the nation of the donkey. Am hadoime lechamor, like a nation similar to the chamor. And we're going to speak about this in a moment, explain a little bit. The Medrash is saying that Avram distanced himself at this momentous occasion of the Akedah. He sees the Shechina, Yitzchak sees it, they say, we're going ahead. You guys can't see it. And from here, the Medrash learns there is a similarity between the animal, a behema, and the Eved. Now, lest you think that this is specifically about a donkey and the animals, I just want to share a Gemara. The Rosh Yeshiva brings this Gemara as well. Masech Shabbos says as follows. Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says in describing different generations, and he's talking about Talmidei Chachamim. He's talking about previous generations. Rabbi Zera was an Amora, talking about Nevi'im, Tanoim, the Chachamim that lived prior to his own generation. Rabbi Zera says as follows: In Rishonim b'nei Malachim, if the earlier generations of Chachamim were to be considered like b'nei malachim, like children of angels, if they were on such a level to be like angels, then anu b'nei anashim, then we're like people. However you want to view the previous generation, you want to view them like children of angels, fine. Then my generation living today, we're like people then. V'im rishonim b'nei anashim. And if you say, no, you're looking at the previous generation as too great, they're like people, the previous generation. Fine, says Reb Zera. Anu, then we are kichamorim, then we're like donkeys. What's the meaning of Reb Zera saying this idea that, well, if the previous generation are like angels, then I'm like a person. And if they're like a person, then I'm like a donkey. What's he getting at? And he's not describing non-Jews servants. He's talking about the leaders of the generation. He's talking about the Amoraim himself, the Gemara. We're like donkeys compared to them. So he seems to be saying very clearly, there's a difference sometimes when we compare things. Some things we compare things in what's known as kamos and echos, in quality and quantity. Sometimes there's a difference in quantity. You can have a person who's very, very wealthy. Let's say their net worth, making up a number, is $5 billion. And you say, well, the next person on the list of wealth has $4 billion. So you say, wow, $1 billion is quite a big amount. I say, true, but you know what? They're in the same Parsha. They're in the same discussion. This one has 5 billion, this one has 4 billion. They're all the same. But if you compare either one of them to your average guy, your average Orthodox rabbi in a shul in a nice city, say like, well, there's nothing, we're not living the same life, we're not in the same world, there's nothing to talk about. Sometimes it's just, or to bring a sports example, people sitting on their couch can look at the worst quarterback in the NFL, the worst quarterback, and say, this guy's terrible, he's a disaster, his stats are awful. So you can say, listen, buddy, you're sitting on your couch. That guy's in the NFL. And it's true. The difference between him and the best quarterback in the NFL is so big. But the difference between that worst guy and you sitting on your couch, you can't even compare. The difference between him and the best quarterback is a little bit of difference of number. He's got a little bit more talent, but they're both super talented. You have no talent when it comes to football. You're in different worlds. Or to take the example back to what he's talking about, if you were to compare people and cows. I've used this example before, so I apologize if I said this, and it's already an old example, but have you ever thought about what it would be like to be a cow and graze all day? Like, what would that experience be like? So the answer is no, you can't think about that, because the very experience of thinking about what it would be like to be a cow has already disqualified you from being a cow. You can't ever experience or think about what it would be like using your brain on the level that you have it as a human being as to what it would be like to be a cow. It's impossible. The difference is categorically different. So too, as it is impossible for us to imagine what it would be like to be an angel on the other side of the equation. We are human beings combined of body and soul, and therefore we can never imagine what it would be like to be an animal, nor can we imagine what it would be like to be an angel. You just can't. It's just too qualitatively different. Reb Zera says, however you want to compare the previous generation, it's not just they were a little bit smarter than us. They're really smart and understand Torah, and we're really smart and understand Torah, and they were a little bit greater than us. No, they were fundamentally in a different category of their understanding than we are. If they were like children of angels, then we're like people. It's not like we have a right to argue on them and say, I don't understand like you, you're not making any sense to me. I'm not in the same category. And if they're like people, then we're like animals. We are fundamentally in a different category. So says Avram to his servants Eliezer at the Akedah as they reach Har HaMoriah, and Avram looks off into the distance and says, I see something. Yitzchak, do you see? Yes. Eliezer, no, you don't. You, therefore, are in the category, a fundamentally different category of an Am Adome L'Chamor. What is this distinction about being an Eved, being a servant, and where is that fundamental difference? And what does this have to say to us still today? The Yeshiva understood in a fascinating way. Yeshiva understood as follows. Take a look at source number 16 in Gemara in Bava Kama. The Gemara says, Arba Avos Nizikin. Famous Gemara in the beginning of Maseches Bava Kama, there are 4 principal categories of damages. A shur, v'habor, v'hamave, v'hahever. An ox, a pit, mave, which will leave untranslated, and fire, meaning to say you can do damage with your animal and you're responsible for that damage. I didn't do it myself. Yes, you're responsible. Even if your animal is not watched, you have to pay for the damages. Or you dig a pit and you're not even around when somebody falls in. I didn't do it. Yes, you did. You put the pit there, you light a fire, you walk away, the fire goes from one house to another house. You're responsible for all of those things, and as the Gemara discusses at great length, 4 different principles of type of damages. What's the word maveh? It's a strange word, the Gemara says, to describe a category of damage. What is it? So the Gemara in the very beginning of the Masechta says, maveh ze adam. That refers to a person, meaning there are 4 categories. A person can do damages through his animal, through digging a pit or leaving a backpack and somebody tripping over it, lighting a fire, or Adam Hamazik, the person himself is responsible for all the damages that he does. How do we know that the word Maveh refers to a person? The Gemara asks, because we have a pasuk. The pasuk says in Sefer Yeshayahu, Im tiba'ayun ba'ayu. What does it mean, Im tiba'ayun ba'ayu? So the full pasuk is, Amar Shomer, the watchman said, the referring to Hashem, Asa boiker v'gam laila, morning is coming and night is coming as well. Im tiba'ayun ba'ayu, if you really desire it. We have a double language in Hebrew. We often have, when the Torah uses a double language, and right, it's like if you surely will want something, Im tiba'ayun ba'ayu, if you really desire it, then Hashev do tshuva uba also and come. So in the context of the Navi, the Navi is telling us that Hashem is saying, it's talking about the exile, morning is coming, the night, but if you desire the end of the exile, do tshuva and it will come. What's the word to describe if you really desire something? Be'ayun. The Gemara says, that's a person. An Adam is a person who desires something, who wants it really badly. The Gemara, in fact, we learn a source for tefillah, for being able to daven from this pasuk, that Adam is a person who davens. A person who davens has desires. A person has wants. And that defines the essence of a person. A person, a free person, is by definition somebody who has a ratzon, who has yearnings, who has dreams, who has hopes, who wants something, and through that is a reflection of his being a Adam Chafshi, a free person. That language, in fact, the Nemuka Yosef in the back of the Gemara, the halacha asks a very simple question. If the Mishnah is really just trying to teach that who's the 4th category, a person, why don't you just use the simple language and say Adam? It should have said there are 4 avos nizikim: shur, bor, Adam, and hever. Ox, pit, man, and hever. Why use a description of ba'ayun, one who desires to describe man? So the Nemuka Yosef writes as a halacha, lo tana Adam. We didn't teach the word Adam. That would mean you'd be chayiv even for your servant or maidservant. And therefore, because Adam means everybody, therefore the Mishnah teaches only a mavet to teach a person, that That's a language to describe somebody who's free. Somebody who's an Eved cannot be described as somebody who has a desire, because an Eved is owned by his master. He's controlled by his master. His day is dictated by his master. His free time, and even if he wants to be an observant Jew, he does so with the permission of his master. Now, I just want to flesh out how the Rosh Yeshiva explained this concept with another medrash to describe what Eliezer was, and then tie that back to the opening midrashim that we started with. The medrash says a pasuk in Mishlei, Even maskil yimshol beven mevish. A wise servant can rule over a foolish son. Says the medrash, what does Shlomo Melech mean when he describes there's such a thing called an Eved maskil, a wise servant? Eved maskil ze Eliezer. That wise servant is a reference to Eliezer. Uma haskala. So what was so wise about Eliezer? Omar, he said to himself, Kfar kililoso shel oso ha'ish biyado. That man's curse is still in my hand. Which man is he referring to? That's the next source, just to skip down to 20. Vayomer Noach said, I mentioned this earlier, Arur Canaan. When he saw his son Cham, what Cham had done in Noach's drunken state, he cursed Canaan, Cham's son, Eved avodim yiheh le'achav. He'll always be a slave to his brothers. So Eliezer said, that's me. Kfar kililaso shel oso ha'ish biyado. Back to source 18. I live with that curse of my forefather, Cham and Canaan. Shema yavo kushi echad u barbar echad v'yishtabebi. Some kushi, some barbarians, some nomadic people are going to come by, and they're going to rule over me because that's my destiny. That's my fate. I was cursed to be a slave. Mutavli lehishtabe b'bayis hazeh. So it's better for me to become a slave to Avram than to somebody else. I'm going to be a slave anyway, so I might as well choose Avram. This medrash is addressing the issue, like, how did we ever end up with Eliezer in the house of Avram anyway? Like, we're not told the background. We're just introduced that Avram had a servant, Eliezer. We were introduced to that 2 weeks ago. We see Eliezer in this week's part. Wait, how did that come about? So the Medrash says he was an Evan Maskil. He's a brilliant slave. What was so wise about him? He said, I'm going to be a slave anyway. So what, should I just wait to be controlled by some passing nomad who's going to conquer my land and drag me away as a slave? I'll be a slave to that guy. I don't want to be a slave to that guy. I might as well be a slave to an Avram. And he does. He becomes a slave to Avram. And we see, going back to the original Midrashim and Gemaras that we started with, when he became a slave to Avram, he took on every single trait of Avram Avinu. Because an Eved does not have his own ratzon, does not have his own desire, doesn't have his own yearning, doesn't have his own dreams. He is Kanui Gufan, or not even a Jewish slave that the Gemara, that the Pasuk talks about as a different, that's a person who's just working for you. We're talking about a slave, which we don't have in today's day and age. Such a person is controlled by the person, their master, and Eliezer made a wise choice. He made a choice to become an Eved of Avram Avinu. And as a result of that choice, he became a Zaken Yoshev Bi Yeshiva. Avram sat and learned in Yeshiva. Eliezer sat and learned in Yeshiva. Eliezer became a master of Avram's Torah. He became a doila umashke, one who dips the bucket into the well of wisdom of Avram and gives everybody else to drink. Ziv ikunan, his spiritual radiance emanated like that of Avram. Where did he get all of that from? He became, as an Eved of Avram, an extension of Avram, but it wasn't as a result of his own desire. It was, this is better than that, so I'll become an Avram servant. And he achieved all that Avraham had achieved. A comment from the Nitziv. The Nitziv writes The Netziv writes, what does this mean that Noach cursed Canaan, that they will always be an Eved Avodim? He says, listen, Shem and Yefes, the other two sons of Noach, you can't say that no one from their generations ever became a slave to anybody else. Sure, not everyone in Canaan became a slave. So what does it mean to curse that particular family? We see it's not true that they always are. Neither one is always yes, or neither one is always no. So the Netziv writes, from the family of Canaan, they were like destined, they were fit, it was misugol to them to be a slave. You were children of slaves and children and great-grandchildren and great slaves, mileda, from birth, umibeten, from the womb, umehirayon, from conception. That is who you are. The other two sons might be in a state of servitude, but they are not slaves. They're not destined for that. And even if they ever ended up in such a state, their inner yearnings, desire lios chavshi. A free person yearns for freedom. Even when they're enslaved, all they think about is, this isn't who I am. I'm going to be free. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to express my freedom. And therefore, they don't make good servants, because they'll always become free. Canaan was cursed to be a slave. Mibeten, from the womb, it exudes out from them. This is just who we are. We don't have the desire to be free. What makes a free person into ba'ayun ba'ayu? It's the desire. If you really, really want it, it's the ratzon to accomplish in this world, to be something on your own. An Eved is an extension of his master. He doesn't have his own freedom. He doesn't have his choices. He doesn't have the ability to do what he wants to do. He does what his master tells him. And even if his master tells him, say Shema, put on tzitzis, okay, he does it because his master said to do it, not because it's an expression of who he is. And that is the greatest freedom. We as Jews, we have a history of servitude, persecution, and throughout every aspect of our history is an expression of freedom, of a desire to be free, a willingness, a ratzon to be able to serve who we want, when we want, not because anyone else says yes or no or does whatever they want. That is the expression of what freedom is. A couple more sources, we'll tie this together and finish up. The pasuk says, Hashem says about us, Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim. We are servants to Hashem. Avadai heim. They're my servants. Asher hotzeis yusam yeretz Mitzrayim. That double language leads to the following drasha, an oft-quoted drasha from Maseches Kedushin, that Hashem says, they're servants to me, they're my servants. Why does he repeat that? So the Gemara uses this to describe the episode, the very first mitzvah that's described in Parshas Mishpatim, after the Torah is given to us in Parshas Yisro. The very next Parsha Mishpatim begins. What's the first halacha that's laid out to the Jewish people? The concept of an eved, of a servant, and setting him free after 6 years. After the 6 years of work, the 7th year, he goes free. And if he says, I want to stay, what do we do to that eved? The parsha begins. We take his ear, put it up against the doorpost, and we pierce a hole into his ear. So the Gemara asks, why do we do that? So the Gemara says in source 20, Ozen sheshama koli al Har Sinai, the ear that heard my voice on Har Sinai when I said, Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim, you Jewish people are my servants. V'lo avadim la avadim. You can't be a servant to a servant. Every Jew is already my servant. You're going to make yourself a servant to a servant. You're going to be kana adam la'atzma. You're going to acquire another master. I'm your master. You're not going to put your freedom, so to speak, in the hands of another person. That ear which heard that should be pierced, says the Gemara. The very first mitzvah that we're taught, the first mitzvah is the idea of an eved, as this distinction of then setting them free and of piercing the ear of the eved who says, I want to stay. He was sold because either he stole and he didn't have the money, or because he didn't have money, he was poor and needed to sell himself. So that happens. And then you want to stay? Then you want to remain in that state of servitude when you could now go free. You paid off your debt, and now you want to stay. That ear needs to. That's the first mitzvah we're taught. Not only is that the first mitzvah we're taught when the Torah is given, this mitzvah is taught back in Mitzrayim. I wanted to share an amazing Yerushalmi. Source 24, back in Mitzrayim, the pasuk says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron." They're still talking with Paro. Hashem commands Moshe and Aaron vayitzavem el bnei Yisrael. He commands Moshe and Aaron regarding bnei Yisrael. V'el Paro melech Mitzrayim lo tzias bnei Yisrael. And he commands Paro, tells Moshe not to command Paro to take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. So the Farshim are bothered in the pasuk. What does it mean that Hashem commanded Moshe el bnei Yisrael? In regards to what? Regarding the Jewish people. Rashi has a beautiful comment there, but we're running out of time, so I just want to go straight to the Yerushalmi. What was the command that Hashem gave Moshe and Aaron in Mitzrayim about the Jewish people? It says the Yerushalmi, al matzivam, al Parsha shiluach avadim. Teach them about sending free your avadim after 6 years. That's what they need to know in Mitzrayim. Yes, when they're slaves now, they're about to go free. They need to learn. There might be a time where they'll be enslaved because they had ran out of money. Either they stole, they didn't have money to pay it back, or they just ran out of money. But after the 6 years, you go out. You can't stay. And if you want to stay in that state where you're giving up what defines you as a human being, to have your ratzon, to have your own desires, your will, your goal, your aspirations, you're going to give that up and put it in the hands of somebody else who's going to tell you what to do. That's the first thing you learn in Mitzrayim before you go free. It's the first thing you're going to learn when I give you the Torah. You have aspirations and you must hold on to it and guard it as yours. That's what's going to define you as a person. Eliezer was an Eved, a wise Eved. He chose Avram rather than being subjugated to some nomadic tribe that's going to conquer his land. And as he chose Avram, he took on the characteristics of Avram. Through Avram, he became a Dole Umashke, one who dips into the well of wisdom and shares it. He had a spiritual radiance. Where did he get that from? Because he was an Eved. Because he was controlled, so to speak, by Avram. So Avram gave to Eliezer all that he was, and he became a miniature Avram. So much so, he used scales of deceit. He was misled, and he weighed his own daughter and said, maybe she's fit to marry into the family of Avram. No, the Medrash says those are Mosnei Mirma. That's a deceitful scale. You're misreading the situation. Yes, you became what you became, but you did it through Avram. You did it by being an Eved to Avram. You need to do that by choosing to be an Eved Hashem. You taking your own ratzon, your own desire, your own yearnings and aspirations and saying, this is what I want for me, not because my master made me do this, gave this to me. You can't choose to be a servant of a person. Ki avadai heim. You're my servants. And that's the choice that we have to make. The two people who are called Eved Hashem, Moshe and Avram, are called my Eved, my servants. That's the choice. That's the freedom that we have to live with our aspirations and our yearnings and our dreams, to fulfill them. And never, and again, we don't have the entire institution of servitude anymore, but the idea of giving that to a person who would control, that's the Baruch, that which is blessed can never connect to that which is cursed in the state of being an Eved. Those two things don't go together. And Avram says to Eliezer, it's not going to work. It can't. Yes, you achieved all of that, but you achieved that through being an Eved to me. And one needs to achieve that by being a Ben Chorin, by being free to choose how they want to live, to choose to be an Eved to Hashem, not to a person. And therefore, Eliezer Avram says, the shidduch is never going to work. You've been deceived by the scales that you're weighing or measuring you and your daughter on. It's not who this is, and that's not how it can be. And that is the reflection of what we are. The reflection of an Adam is his desire, is his yearnings, his will, ratzon, to become, to be, to grow, to change. That defines us. And Eved doesn't have that. And we, says the Rosh Yeshiva to conclude, have to nurture that, have to treasure that. What defines us is that ability to yearn, the ability to be free to dream, to chase the dreams, to be what we want to be, and to dream wisely, to dream to be an Eved to Hashem. So, we shouldn't be slaves to other things out there, slaves to money, slaves to our jobs, slaves to anything else. To only dream and yearn, to be slaves, slaves to Hashem. That is what we learned from this Medrash and the Rashi, that Eliezer dreamed of marrying off his daughter, and Avram said, it's not going to happen, not with my son, with Yitzchak. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Always a pleasure learning together. Look forward to next week.
Thank you, Arav.
Thank you.